Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to On the Horn, and it's News Talk tonight. I'm Dave Moore, and we have a few things to talk about, not the least of which is, it's official, it's a hurricane. That's because Jim Cantore says so. Yep. Apparently New Orleans is going to get hit once again, and it's going to be hit by a bona fide hurricane. Now, of course, if anyone was listening to Rush Limbaugh earlier today, he says that Democrats like natural disasters because it proves that we need a government. He of the small government size, you never know. Anyways, the things we're going to be talking about tonight are the ballot line issue heading to the Supreme Court, national party politics take center stage in the 5th District, Murphy's latest ad makes questionable claims about the WWE, the U.S. Senate race that Murphy is running in, too close to call. The Quinnipiac University came back with a poll that basically has McMahon up by 2 points, but because the margin of error is 2.6%, it's too close to call. And then we had our illustrious governor down in East Haven this morning surveying what Irene did to us a year ago. Because, yes, that's right, folks. If you haven't been watching TV, you wouldn't know that today was the anniversary of when Storm Irene hit Connecticut. And that was the beginning of the end for CLNP. Just saying. Well, as if the Republican Party in the state of Connecticut had nothing better to do, they decided to sue the Secretary of State, Denise Merrill, because they think that they should be on the top line of the ballot. So they sued in Superior Court. The Superior Court basically said no, and the matter went immediately to the Appellate Court, and the Appellate Court basically punted to the Supreme Court. And because it is a political issue and it involves elections, the Supreme Court took the case. What is at issue is whether or not Dan Malloy won as a Democrat or whether he won as a Democrat and a working party candidate. Because if you look at it the second way, the Republicans say they got more votes. Now, that's a fascinating rubric, given the fact that it's not Tom Foley sitting in the governor's mansion. It's Dan Malloy. But because the governor ended up with 26,308 votes. The information I have is from our friends at ctnewsjunkie.com. Christine Stewart pointed out that as far as the results from the election of November 2nd, 2010, Dan Malloy got, 560,870 votes for Tom Foley. 540,970 votes were cast for Dan Malloy on the Democratic Party line, but as I mentioned, 26,308 votes were on the Working Party line. Since the Democrats only got 540,970 and the Republicans got 560,874, they say they should be on the top line. This is yet another example of a Republican Party doing what it can to shake things up as far as voting is concerned. You have the same sort of situation happening in Pennsylvania with the voter ID laws. You have the same sort of situation happening in Ohio, where the Republican Secretary of State is messing around with provisional votes and whether or not people can vote on weekends. Ohio has had a long history of being able to vote before the election, something that we Connecticutians never really thought of and probably never will. Apparently, there is going to be an argument on September 12th before the Supreme Court, and the two issues are whether or not the complaint is barred by sovereign immunity. I can tell you that that ain't going to happen because the only person that you can sue relative to placement on the ballot is the Secretary of State. So I think that the Democrats were basically saying you had to go through the claims commissioner first in order to waive the sovereign immunity situation. I don't think that the Supreme Court is going to buy that. But the second issue is, does General Statutes 9-249A require the Republican Party's candidates for office be placed on the first line, because they are claiming that the statute says, or should be read as saying, that the party with the most votes gets the top line. Given the fact that the Democratic governor won, I think that the Supreme Court probably is not going to play ball with Republicans. Just saying. But this is yet another example of time and money well spent in our court system by a political party. Now, one of the other things that's been happening with the elections that has been rather interesting is the 5th Congressional District. That district has about 40 towns and cities in it. It is primarily northwestern Connecticut, although there is a bit of central Connecticut as well, including, among other things, the cities of Meriden and New Britain. I mention Meriden because the thing that's still up in the air is whether or not Chris Donovan is still running. He is the nominee for that wonderful party we referred to before, the Working Party. Apparently today, Elizabeth Esty, who is the Democratic nominee by virtue of her primary win this last Tuesday, or 2 Tuesdays ago, excuse me, is meeting with the Working Party's executive committee in order to see whether or not they will be willing to switch their endorsement from Chris Donovan over to Elizabeth Esty. Now, as some of you who have been listening to this wonderful show before will note, Chris Donovan immediately after the election went on a vacation. Apparently he went to Pennsylvania and he dealt with some family stuff, moved a kid into college. I feel your pain, Chris. I just did that today myself. So he was unavailable to A, comment, B, make a decision about whether or not he was going to continue to run. This last Saturday, apparently, Mr. Donovan and Ms. Esty did have a phone call. They talked for a bit. Mr. Donovan's folks did not comment on what was said or what was talked about. Esty's folks did comment on how it was a pleasant phone call and that they believed that it was a positive phone call. And according to Mr. Donovan, who did comment thereafter, he did advise Ms. Esty to meet with the Working Party Executive Committee in order to make a choice as to whether or not the Working Party would switch its nomination or switch its endorsement. The interesting thing is that it would be infinitely easier if Mr. Donovan actually withdrew his name from that particular party line. Hasn't done it as of yet. Meanwhile, the Connecticut delegation of all 5 congresspeople, as well as both senators, have now endorsed Elizabeth Esty, as has the governor and lieutenant governor. So it is pretty clear that the Democratic Party is pretty much forming up ranks and supporting Elizabeth Esty. And Elizabeth and Malloy have already started taking shots at Mr. Rohrabaugh. Andrew Rohrabaugh, senator, is the Republican nominee for the 5th District. And the commentary provided by both Governor Malloy and Elizabeth Esty was that if you vote for Rohrabaugh, you are basically voting to have Speaker John Boehner return to the Speaker of the House, and that Rohrabaugh will basically vote the party line. This is a line of thinking that Senator Rohrabaugh has come back swinging at, saying anybody who has looked at my record knows that I do not vote the party line. Senator Rohrabaugh has been described as a New England Republican. One could surmise that he means moderate. in that he's fiscally conservative and socially liberal. And one of the things that Senator Rohrabaugh said was, one of the themes of my campaign has been that I am a Republican, but I am an American before I'm a Republican. Clearly, Dan Malloy and Elizabeth Esty appear to be Democrats before they're Americans. So the partisan mudslinging has now begun in the 5th District. That, however, pales in comparison to what we're seeing on the airwaves relative to the U.S. Senate race. Senator Blumenthal, by the way, has endorsed Chris Murphy, who is the Democratic nominee, who has been shellacked by Linda McMahon, who is the Republican nominee, for a 97, no, I'm sorry, that's his voting percentage. Let's see, he made about 20% of the meetings that he was scheduled for. The only problem with that particular attack is that that was in his first term and a half. He's been serving 3. His actual attendance record for committees and important sessions has come up considerably in the last term and a half. What Representative Murphy has been saying in response is that he actually has a voting record of 97% for the entirety of his 3 terms. So he's not gaining a whole lot of traction with that. And it's pretty clear that he realizes that because he just released an ad that makes some very interesting claims about the World Wrestling Entertainment Group that is the former employer of Linda McMahon. Linda was formerly the CEO of World Wrestling Entertainment and was the chief operating officer for a time. She has not been since she ran for the Senate seat in 2010. The questionable claims are that the Murphy campaign has said in its ad, as CEO of World Wrestling Entertainment, Linda McMahon had a plan, shift profits overseas to avoid U.S. taxes. Now, that was based on a particular form that was filed with the Internal Revenue Service called a K-1. And in that particular form, it does indicate that there was a substantial amount of money that was being earned internationally. Well, it turns out that WWE has a number of different venues in Europe and Asia and Africa. And when they were running, what they call bouts, entertainment, they were doing so at these venues and earning money at those venues, and that's what had to be reported on the IRS form. And in fact, they also note in the form that they ended up paying more taxes in Europe, Asia, and Africa than they would have had they made the earnings in the United States. The taxes aspect is an ongoing issue. Now, unlike Mitt Romney, Linda McMahon has actually publicized her tax returns, those of herself and Vince McMahon. So she's not dealing with a shell game situation. It's pretty clear where she's making the money and who she's paying the taxes to. Now, the McMahon campaign came back with a response of, gee, if Chris Murphy had done any work in the private sector, he would understand that you have to file these forms the way that you do and that you have to pay the taxes where they are earned. Murphy's basic response to McMahon on the charges that he wasn't showing up at committee meetings was, well, if Linda McMahon knew anything about public politics, she would know that committees usually have time crunch situations. They're meeting at the same time, so representatives and or senators have to pick and choose which ones they go to. And if Linda McMahon was a public servant, she would know that. Don't think that either one of those arguments from either side, frankly, is going to resonate well with the electorate. The latest polls are indicating a number of things, and it's not so much an anti-incumbent flavor in the state of Connecticut as it is a please don't hit us with the same stuff you've been hitting us with for the last 2 to 4 years. Now, the issue, frankly, of the mudslinging on the Senate level is that we have two people who have not been senators before. Chris Murphy has been a member of the House of Representatives for the last 6 years. That counts for something, but the House of Representatives does not run like the United States Senate. The House of Representatives does not run like anything anyone ever would consider to be usual or normal. Ditto, frankly, for the United States Senate as well. There are arcane rules that have been in place in that august body for, 100, 120, some 150 years. The Senate moves a lot slower than does the House of Representatives. And there was a recent report out that indicated that the 2010, 2011, 2012 House and Senate have done the least amount of work in over 47 years. That means that the bills that have passed have not been signed into law for one reason or another. Either it's gotten tied up in the Senate, or the president has vetoed, or it never actually even made it out of the House. The point is, neither of these candidates are going to really know what they need to know the second that they get in there. There's going to be a learning curve for either Chris Murphy or Linda McMahon. I think that there would be a fairly decent argument to be made that Chris would have a little less of a learning curve because he has worked in legislative bodies before. Linda has not. Why does that matter? Well, guess what? Quinnipiac University just came out with their poll. And it's a statistical dead heat. In other words, the electorate hasn't quite figured out who they want to send. And apparently they have some good reason. Now, the Q poll polled 1,472 voters. This, again, is also from CT News Junkie and also by Christine Stewart. A poll of 1,472 voters with a 2.6% margin of error shows 49% of voters support McMahon and 46% support Murphy. Now, because there is this 2.6% margin, if you were to, for instance, subtract 2.6 from 49 and add it to the 46, you would have Murphy slightly ahead. Because it's within the statistical margin of error, it's considered to be a dead heat. Now, what is most interesting is that in 2010, more women voters did not like Linda McMahon than did. That apparently is starting to change. She has a... I'm looking here. These are the ages here. Her edge is due to the double-digit lead among independent voters and being close among women. According to the poll, 47% of voters now have a favorable opinion of McMahon, while just 35% have an unfavorable opinion. This is remarkably different from April and June, the last two times that the poll came out. McMahon's 44 to 42% lead among men swamps Murphy's 50 to 46% lead among women. So in other words, McMahon in 2010 had an approval percentage of women approving, I should say, of about 40% and 60 against. This is one of the reasons why Richard Blumenthal won by 100,000 votes. And Blumenthal also had a slight lead as far as the men were concerned. This time around, McMahon has what amounts to be a 12 percentage point lead amongst men. And that would explain the 3% difference as far as the current poll is concerned. What is even more interesting is that 55% of independent voters support McMahon as opposed to 40% of independent voters supporting Murphy. The poll also clearly indicates that there is still a sizable percentage of folks who have not made up their mind. In this case, it's about 5%, which under normal circumstances would be relatively small. In this particular situation where the candidates are running so close, the 5% means a big deal. It is a big deal. It's a big difference. Amongst folks who are 35 years or under, Murphy is supported by 51 to 43%. McMahon leads, however, 54 to 42% amongst voters from 35 to 54 years old, and the candidates are split 48 to 48 in voters over 55. That's because voters over 55 actually remember what professional wrestling looked like in the 1950s and the 1960s. That was before WWE, which came in the 1970s. Said Murphy's spokesman, "This was always going to be a tough race, and we don't take anything for granted, and neither should McMahon," said Tori Lavender, Murphy's spokeswoman. "She spent her whole career getting rich at the expense of her own employees and at the expense of Connecticut jobs. Now she's dumped over $65 million into a marketing campaign to try to fool voters into thinking that she's something that she's not." Now, one of the other items that came up in the campaign commercial by Murphy was that basically they stated that the workers for WWE don't get health insurance, that they don't get other specific benefits. And the McMahon campaign quickly came back with all of our salaried employees and our non-performers have their own health insurance. Our performers also have their own health insurance, but they are entitled to buy a better health insurance because they are earning somewhere between $100,000 to the marquee players getting $250,000 a year, and therefore they are able to buy better insurance. But any injuries that occur in the ring are injuries that we, the WWE, cover. So apparently, Murphy's campaign is, according to the McMahon campaign, playing very fast and loose with the record and is putting out something that is less than substantiated. And the poll numbers indicate why. Frankly, if I was on the Murphy campaign, and I'm not, I would just borrow one of the Dick Blumenthal campaign ads, the one that showed Linda McMahon as CEO of WWE in the ring with her husband Vince, talking to a man who then she grabs behind the head and proceeds to knee in the groin. That really is all you need to show in order to say, do you want this person to be your next United States Senator? And there are some who might say yes. However, this is not the sort of activity that one would expect in the United States Senate. There we go. Say it again.
My guess is they're probably going to do it to you anyway. At some point, I usually feel like I've been kneed in the groin by every politician that's out there. So both parties.
This is true.
Parties. So just figured I'd throw in my 2 cents since I'm sitting here.
Given the fact that we now have, 70 days until the election.
Yes.
And it is, it's surprising to me how quickly we descended into the sub-basement in the United States Senate race. And
it doesn't get better from here either.
No, it doesn't. And you have a situation where McMahon is out earning Murphy by 2-1. So she is going to have a much bigger pot to draw from to throw out all kinds of fun and interesting commercials. And Murphy's going to have to be fairly careful about what he says, when he says it, and how he says it, because he's only going to have one shot.
Yep.
And it is now that could change if the super PACs come into the fray, and the super PACs have already shown that they're willing to do so.
Right.
They did so in the 5th Congressional District on both sides. And there's already tremors, if you will, an indication that they are gearing up to join in on the Senate race as well. And God help us when that happens. Because you're talking about millions of dollars that are going to be flooding the airways, and we won't have any peace.
No.
It's going to be nonstop.
Not to mention what your email, junk mail is going to look like, what your phones are going to sound like. There's no escaping this. For the next, you said 70 days?
Oh, yeah.
Don't expect, I was telling you guys this a couple of weeks ago. We usually get about 3 to 5 phone calls at our house a week. Max. From Monday morning to Tuesday of the what do you call it there? The primary.
Right.
I believe it was 18 phone calls that we got in less than 48 hours.
Ouch.
That's 5 times what we normally get.
Robocall heaven.
Yeah. So just stop it.
No, that's honestly, not going to stop.
To all of the candidates out there who are running or considering running ever again, having your spouse call me is not going to sway my vote. I don't care who you are. You could have Jesus Christ himself call my cell phone. It's not going to change my opinion of you.
Hey, Bill Clinton was calling for Roberti. That was close. Hey, he was the last president that we had a surplus with. Come on. No, he doesn't walk on water. Good Lord. The problem is, though, Brian, and by the way, Brian Lee is joining me. The problem is that you have cost-effective aspects. Okay, signs cost X number of dollars. Mm-hmm. Phone calls cost X number of dollars. Radio spots cost a lot more, X number of dollars. TV costs X and Y number of dollars.
Can they text messages to people? Do they have access to our cell phones? I have no idea.
I don't know what the SEC rules are for that.
How is it that if you're a member of the National Do Not Call list, how is it that they're allowed to call your house?
They're not supposed to. Huh. And I've also discovered that there are a number of, shall we say, commercial enterprises, businesses that have started calling, despite the fact that we are on the Do Not Call list.
What I was told when we signed up for that list was if it's someone who you've done business with previous, they're allowed to call you again. There's a link there between you and them as a service provider.
In other words, no cold calls.
Right.
Period.
So, but Lord knows I didn't ask anybody to call me with political advice. Just saying.
True. Very, unfortunately, very true. Well, we're going to take a little break, but we will be back, and we're going to talk about storms, both past and present. Storms that we might wish could occur, say, by, November 6th. But that is something to delve into when we come back.
We're here for you right now.
onthehorn.com.
Budwitz and Meyerjack PC is a large Connecticut-based CPA firm with offices in Cheshire and Farmington, Connecticut. Large enough to handle engagements of enterprises with annual revenues in excess of $100 million, yet small enough to cater to smaller businesses and individual clients who expect personalized attention from partners and staff. Client service is the cornerstone of our practice. Our clients have a fixed fee for their audit and tax work. What this means to the client is we're approachable. Personal communication and client services make for strong relationships. Budwitz and Meyerjack, certified public accountants.
Sandits Travel for business and leisure. We'll take you there. Sandits Travel has been proudly serving Connecticut since 1960. That's over 50 years. And we're ready for another 50 years of superior service. Whether you prefer to come in, call in, or log on, we invite you to explore how efficient, diverse, and fun it is to book through Sandits Travel. Save your money and your time with us. Sandits Travel. We'll take you there.
All right. Well, we wouldn't be having this wonderful show were it not for our wonderful, wonderful sponsors, one of whom is Deepwater Seafood of Avon. Have you been to the only fish market in Farmington? Farmington Valley. Deepwater is located on Route 44 and is open 6 days a week, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., Saturdays, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. One of the best things about Deepwater is their fish are fresh. 3 deliveries daily to meet your needs. Deepwater has a menu of grilled fish items, scampi, fish and chips, soups, bisques, and chowders. For your catering needs, authentic paella, cedar plank, salmon sides, and always the traditional New England clam bake. Deepwater also has the very best shrimp cocktail that you'll ever find anywhere. It's awesome. Call in your order at 860-676-9657, and they'll have your order ready for pickup when you arrive. Deepwater Seafood of Avon, not just for the halibut. And finally, our friends from CentralCTDental.com, Dr. Camp Sambor and Lupini for serious issues or routine checkups. Go nowhere else. Easy to get to on the Plainville-Farmington line. Call 860-747-5761 or make an appointment online at CentralCTDental.com. Oh, yeah, that's flawless again. Here we go. That's what I'm looking for. Whew, tell ya. It ain't easy being me. Well, as I mentioned before, our governor, who basically can be found anywhere. He was in New Hampshire earlier this week at a campaign whistle stop, basically touting the president. And he is also going to be down in South Carolina at the Democratic Convention. Apparently, he's going to be giving one of the not for prime time speeches. This morning, however, he was down in East Haven, particularly at Cozy Beach. Now, this is a particular spot that got hit fairly hard by Storm Irene in 2011. Yes. August 28th, 2011. That's right. It's the anniversary. Yeah. And it turns out that if you go to Cozy Beach, you're going to discover that there are about 14 houses that are being, well, they're at various stages of rebuilding. Let's put it that way. There are 17 houses that are not. And they've either become vacant lots or they're sadly collapsing in amongst themselves. Now, of course, the town of East Haven is going to step in if they became a real danger. But the point being is the insurance companies have been a bit slow on coming back with the money. And here's why. You have 2 forms of insurance. You have general hazard insurance. That would take care of the wind damage. Then you have flood insurance. That takes care of the water damage. Now, the flood insurance isn't quite so simple. Why is that, you ask? Well, was the flooding a result of the inundation, Or was it a result of the actual tidal surge? Or was it windborne surge? Because if it's windborne surge, they're saying it's wind damage, even though it's water that's getting into the house. Now, of course, you also have the folks on the other side who are saying, oh, wait a minute, that's not wind damage, that's water damage. We're not paying either. So you end up with not quite a Mexican standoff because the homeowner is the guy that's in the middle and the two guys are not firing their guns. And the homeowner's kind of glad that they're not firing the guns, but on the other hand, he's also not getting any money.
Right. They're not cutting him a check.
And when they do cut a check, they are cutting a check with a percentage taken out because they've assessed that the damage is not entirely either wind or water.
Is that the VIG?
It's not so much the VIG as it is, we have a legitimate reason not to pay you, so we're not going to. Now, whether it's really legitimate or not is another matter. And this is the sort of thing that gives both insurance companies and lawyers bad names.
Absolutely.
Because it sometimes requires a lawyer to step in to file what is called a declaratory judgment action. And the declaratory judgment is where you're asking the court, please tell these parties what exactly the contract or the agreement or whatever says, and that becomes the judgment, and then the insurance companies have to abide by that. Okay? And in order to have the flood insurance people and the general hazard insurance people understand what they can and cannot, you have to file this DEC action, they call it, declaratory judgment action. Folks don't have a whole lot of money to do that with, and declaratory judgments, while they're not overly expensive, they're not cheap. And if you're trying to save money to rebuild your house,
Right.
the first thing in your mind isn't going to be, let's hire a lawyer. No, that's going to be one of the last things you're going to be thinking of.
Like, where's all my stuff?
Now, another thing that can be done is you have a system called private and public adjustments. A public adjuster is basically someone who you would hire to go in and assess the damage and determine what caused this damage. The insurance companies are not bound to follow their lead, but more often than not, they do.
Who pays for that now? The homeowner or former homeowner?
The way
Or
that
the
they
insurance company split the...
the way they get paid is that they will get a percentage of the insurance payout.
Okay.
Sometimes 1, sometimes 2, sometimes as much as 5%, depending on how complicated the issue is.
Okay.
But the end result is that instead of John Q. Smith getting $18,000 off of a $50,000 policy, he's more likely to get $50,000 on a $50,000 policy when the house is completely trashed. And so the homeowner realizes $40,000 out of that, or maybe even 45. But it's a heck of a lot more than the 18 that the insurance company would have otherwise paid.
True.
And it would be a good thing for some of the homeowners to actually engage the services of a public adjuster down there, because it's pretty clear what was wind damage when you have a house that's blown back. It wasn't the tide. It was blown back.
Right.
And when Irene hit just under hurricane force.
Right.
It was sustained winds of 70 miles an hour. For those of you who need to know, hurricane is 72. Why it's not 75, I don't know.
80.
I don't get it. But the fact of the matter was, and the problem for the folks, for instance, in Milford, Old Saybrook, Westbrook, Clinton, Madison, East Haven, New Haven, West Haven, is that the storm hit at high tide. So there was a fairly significant storm surge. The storm surge was between 6 and 12 feet. So there were instances where the water was causing a fairly significant amount of damage. I will grant the hazard insurance folks that point. But you can pretty much tell when the damage was caused by wind versus your house being soaked. I'm just saying. Dan Malloy was down in East Haven this morning surveying the damage that was done and called the progress being made pretty darn impressive. I was kind of surprised by that. I would have said, given what they have had to go through, it is impressive. I wouldn't have just said pretty darn impressive. Now, I will say this about the governor. He was pretty smart, because guess who he brought along as an honored guest? The insurance commissioner. And he basically was having the insurance commissioner talk to homeowners about any problems that they might have had with their insurance companies and how the insurance commission could possibly step in and help. Now, I can tell you from experience representing certain clients, the insurance commissioner's office is not always very fast to jump in and try to sort things out. You pretty much have to drag them in kicking and screaming because they're friends with the insurance company. Okay? It's not an easy thing. However, the governor in this particular instance was doing the right thing by bringing the commissioner along with him. And it basically, by the way, the insurance commissioner is Thomas B. Lenardi. He attended the tour to hear from residents. And I don't think that you're going to see the Gordian knot cut that much faster because he was there. But some people might, who were perhaps teetering on the edge of actually getting some real money, are now going to be likelier to get real money to finish the repairs.
Let's hope it makes a difference.
One of the interesting things that the seaside communities have done as a result of the storm experience is that they are requiring homeowners now, not just on new builds, but existing homes now have to be raised above the mean high tide mark and then several feet above that. And or they have to be moved back a certain amount of feet from the mean high tide mark. In some instances, you can't move the house back, but you can jack it up. Mm-hmm. In certain instances where Irene helped, you have already moved the house back. You can perhaps move it back a little bit more and then jack it up. One of the other things that the governor touted as he was touring Cozy Beach was the fact that our response time is getting better, that, in fact, he ran a mock emergency 4-day thing about 3 weeks ago. And it's pretty clear that we learned some things from both the Storm Irene and the October storm.
Now, when the mock emergency was run, did people know that it was actually just a test?
Yes.
Did they know that it was going to happen?
The town officials did.
Yeah.
The regular residents, not so much.
Okay.
But it was basically an effort to gauge what town responses would be as far as figuring out that they have an emergency, contacting the state government, the state government then declaring an emergency, and then allowing for goods and services to then flow to the affected areas.
Okay.
And in that, there was a much better response, figuratively speaking, this time around than there was a year ago. Now, I will grant you, Storm Irene knocked out about 800,000 people from power.
Yes.
The October storm knocked out almost 900,000.
Yes.
And it was done within 2.5 months of each other. Well,
Yeah, give or take.
Two months.
Give or take.
2 months.
Yeah, because it was Halloween weekend.
It was right before the election,
Yeah.
and a lot of towns ended up having to, well, let's just say the candidates weren't knocking on doors. They didn't want to die.
Now, did you lose power in either
Yes.
extended period?
For Irene, it was a couple of hours.
Okay.
Surprise, surprise, because I was frankly very surprised that we lost power at all. Because Irene was tracking a lot further to the east, and we weren't supposed to. We got a lot of rain.
Yep.
And what caused the power outages were the trees in the soaked soil suddenly falling over.
Right, because the leaves hadn't fallen from any of the trees.
Right.
Blah, 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 much like in October as well.
But the October storm hit us a lot harder for that very
Are
reason.
you in Avon? Or?
Simsbury.
Simsbury, okay.
We were out for 9 days.
Okay.
There were actually a couple spots in Simsbury that were out for 10.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many generators were purchased after Irene. It was after Irene.
My sister lost her power for, I believe it was 10 days during Irene. They live out in Voluntown. And the second storm, I think they probably lost it for 3 more days. And there's nothing where they are. They're on off of, I want to say Route 49, but still, that's in the middle of, it's Voluntown. It's the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. And I would, if I lived out there, I'd certainly own a generator.
There's, look,
I might own 2.
Frank, one relatively large one,
Yeah.
6,000, 5,000, whatever. That'll run the furnace, the hot water heater. That'll run your basic kitchen stuff and a TV.
Yep.
Which, as long as your cable isn't down, is really important.
See, I don't need the TV as much. When there's a big storm, I usually go right to the radio.
Yep.
I've got a hand crank radio, but it's awesome anytime. And when
Hell
we get
yeah,
out- when we get out to the
it'll
beach,
play anytime. Yep.
Minute worth of cranking gives me 3 hours worth of music or ball game or whatever I want to listen to. So
It's
it's
a
perfect.
beautiful thing.
Yeah,
and
it's perfect, and then I don't have to worry about.
and the last
generators.
thing we're going to leave you with, speaking of generators, is what is happening up in Boston? Are they trying to generate interest?
No.
I don't know.
No.
What I do know is that since the mega trade, they took 3 games out of 4 against Kansas City.
It was all that dead weight holding them back.
Well, all I can say is if you're told I'm going to take $270 million of your payroll and all you have to do is give me $12 million back, you run.
Oh,
You don't walk.
cash it in, baby. Cash that mess in.
Indeed. Well,
Can I throw something out
Please
there?
do.
Because I asked you earlier when we'd gone to break if you're on Twitter. I never had any interest in Twitter, but there are certain people who you have to follow.
Okay.
Because they're just funny. Piers Morgan might be one of the funniest people on the planet. And this was just in like 3 minutes ago.
oh boy.
Come on, Michelle Bachmann, standing me up 15 minutes before our date? Are you kidding me?
Piers, she's married. Really?
She was supposed to be on the show.
Oh, I thought he was talking about a
15
date.
minutes. No, 15 minutes before she was supposed to be on. She bagged
Oops.
on convention night.
This just in. Michelle Bachmann stands up Piers Morgan
Poor Piers.
15 minutes before interview.
Poor Piers.
Sorry, Piers. Well, you can follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on, I don't know, Ustream.
Call us here.
You
message us.
You can
We'll
Skype
answer
us. Okay?
Anything you want.
860-266-HORN. That's 860-266-4676. But do that next week because News Talk's over now. We will be followed by an interesting WTNF where Elliot and Brian are going to be talking about Oktoberfest beers. And frankly, it couldn't come soon enough.
I'll get my later hose and I'm out.
I'm Dave Moore. You've been listening to Brian Lee, and you've been listening to News Talk Tonight on the Horn. Have a good night.